economics is one of those disciplines that is somewhat non-intuitive, and people in general have a strong tendency, and I'm talking of departments and even ministers, they have a strong tendency to take on a significant role for the state or in whatever the government is in order to implement their objectives, little realizing the unintended consequences and the fact that markets can do most of these things better. So an example would be town planning, where we had such extraordinary restrictions on housing development in Melbourne that the house prices are at least double, if not more, than, say, Houston, just got virtually, half the planning restrictions, or very few relatively, except car parking and few things. So what we see here is that the average punter in the government departments is not aware of the possibility and does not respect the possibility of markets resolving issues through bargaining and, like Ronald Coase's theorem. I'm not sure you're familiar with that, but he's a Nobel Prize winner. There's I'm
not familiar. What is the theorem?
Yeah, so Ronald Coase's theorem was basically saying that if there is any negative externality, which is what they claim. So many of these interventions by the government across the world, including in the USA, in many parts, including New York, etc. There's restrictions in city planning are founded on the assumption that people are unable to bargain and resolve matters by themselves. But Ronald Coase basically said that if the transaction costs are low, and at that point was further disputed by Harold Demsetz, who was a great friend of mine and a professor in California, died a couple of years ago. Ronald Coase is also dead, by the way, at the age of 100. So what these guys said is that there is a significant possibility, even in complex situations, that the markets will resolve the situation in an efficient manner, whereas the governments will generally have one-size-fit-all approach, which will lead to great amount of inefficiencies in society. So I can go on and on this particular issue. Town planning is a phenomenal area of, So what we find is that as an economist, our job in the government was essentially to provide cabinet with the alternative view in terms of policy when the departments would come to us. So it has been very challenging exercise because economics is not intuitive, as I said. But having said that, I think we were able to achieve significant improvements in many areas, including in town planning and urban planning. So, yeah, and of course in agriculture, etc. So what we have achieved in Victoria over the past, and I've written a book on this, it's not on video. So that's Breaking Free of Nehru, in which I have a complete chapter on the wonderful system of governance in Australia. Now, the problem, I guess, happened in this particular case with COVID, where the matters became so disproportionate. So we have a risk-based approach in all cases. There's the regulatory policy area where I worked in. We're talking about risk-based approaches, performance-based approaches, where we really expect the government to have a minimal amount of intervention and only intervene where absolutely necessary. That's the basic principle of good governance. Now, this particular principle was dramatically breached or violated in March 2020 all over the world except in Sweden, when governments started imposing the lockdowns and so on, shut down international borders. Now, the proportionality of this whole exercise was what drove me initially into commenting particularly internally within the department, where I had written significant, emails to senior officials. But also I have an ongoing blog on Times of India, which is, the world's largest English newspaper. And on that, I've written 17 articles before I resigned in September on this issue, where I demonstrated that the age-based risk management, which is, by the way, what Martin Kulldorff of Harvard, public school, Harvard Medical School, he's a good friend. He has also been supporting, and of course, Sunetra Gupta from Oxford, etc. So we have eminent people, eminent public health specialists supporting this common sense approach of risk-based management, which is essentially saying that those at high risk, like the elderly, would need to be protected, whereas those at low risk can actually go ahead and even get the virus, and it will not really harm most of them. Yeah, and so that's the kind of approach which was what I was advising within the Department of Treasury and Finance, as well as publicly in my Times of India article. And my Times of India articles, by the way, I was sharing with India's Cabinet Secretary, who's Rajiv Gauba, from the Indian Administrative Service. We run all the main positions of the government in India. And my close contacts and friendships with my batchmates, we call them, continued. And so I was sharing all this information at the very highest level.